For today's presentation, we have Mr. Bonner, who founded the choreo group after traveling to Pyongyang for the first time in the early 1990s. Since then, he's been collecting graphics and packaging and what he said to me before lunch was other crap from North Korea. And he's been traveling up there for the last 20 plus years. And along the way, he has published documentaries, including North Korea's first girl power movie, Comrade Kim Goes Flying, and a well-known documentary on North Korea versus the Italian football team, their famous victory in 1966. And he has a new book, Made in North Korea, Graphics from Everyday Life, which is the one on sale at the front of the dining room before and after this lunch. So Nick is going to talk to us about his experiences of traveling to Pyongyang, and he's going to have a slideshow to present along the way. So afterwards we'll take questions, so please give a warm welcome to Mr. Bonner. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's not often that you sort of can fill a room with people coming to see what is, I think in Amazon it's #1 in paper ephemera, whatever that is. Thank you for coming for a lecture on graphics. Very interesting indeed that you made this choice. What it actually contains is this book actually is an experience of 25 years. So I'm going to take you through it using the graphics, the sort of visualizations to explain some of the stories and perhaps some of the bits and pieces that I've come across in North Korea. But I think as Paul French couldn't have put it better, that nobody has ever turned the accumulated rubbish under their bed into a better book. It is... my training is a landscape architect, and I have a design background, so I don't see it as rubbish, just some people might. The three types of sort of series of the interest with graphics is one is just the visual, and here is a ginseng face powder used to keep yourself looking white when you're sort of doing the rice fields, etc. Of course, a white complexion, etc. It's a beautiful process, a beautiful design, two-color, probably a sort of lino cut, sort of offset litho process, so hand-printed. So one of the interests is just simply, as kids, like if you take kids around on a walk, they'll put stones in the pocket. As I was traveling around North Korea, would just collect interesting objects. So this is how the collection started. Then there's a sort of anthropological side to it all. Here's a New Year's postcard. Let's make the people an army unity as hard as steel. That's something you'd send to your loved one. More likely something that a soldier would send to his partner. This is the time of the Songun politics under Kim Jongun, and it was basically a lot of finances were being directed towards the military, and to keep the public on side, there was a lot of sort of propaganda at the time and art showing how people were being serviced by being helped by the military. And the military do help in agriculture, in construction, etc. But a very large standing army. And then perhaps another sort of anthropological, this is a lovely little thing. This is an Air Choreo fan. You used to get handed in sort of July in the steamy times. And it also tells more about Korea. For me, it's a sort of reminiscent. If you go to an Air Choreo hostess and say to her, you know, where's your favorite place in the world? She'll say, my favorite place is my country. My country is best. And you then say to her, where else have you been? And she'll just look at you blankly. Even when they land in Beijing, it's just at the airport. They don't get out. They then sort of fly back. So it sort of gives a sort of an idea of the sort of psychosis, this total isolation in North Korea. And finally, I think for me it's a memory, really. This is when we were filming A State of Mind. North Korea has, or used to have, the last mass games was 2013. But it's a performance with 100,000 kids. One of the films we made, we filmed these girls for a year. This is during training on hard concrete outside, and this was the ticket used for the anniversary. So part of it also for me is a diary. This set of tickets is the 5-1 bus ticket, and to me it's very pertinent. When we started filming The Game of Their Lives, we would take our camera crew around the city, and one time we got on a public bus, and we found that there was a person with us who was taking off the old people and making the place look ordered and sort of, and we just thought, we're not going to film this. And there was this sort of impasse between them understanding us, not misunderstanding us, that we wanted colour, and that they wanted to present their country in a very specific way, which is what happens to every single journalist who goes to North Korea. You're extremely directed. Those who've been will be able to confirm that. And it took our sound man to say, aren't you proud of the old people who fought for you in the Korean War? And from then on, every single old person was ushered back onto the bus. So I think with North Korea, I mean, half the reason that we've managed to achieve the projects that we have is hitting a blank wall, but being able to help the Koreans sort of get themselves around it or over it. I know you're just dying to know about the makeup of a Korean graphic, so I will tell you. There's a lot of traditional influence. This is the white tiger, traditional calligraphy from the 1700s. Before that period, it was Chinese characters they were using. And you can see at the bottom Korean design that you would often find in temples coming out. So a lot of sort of cultural, I think this is what's so interesting, is they still keep that cultural identity. It has been influenced in a large way by Japanese occupation, and then more recently by the Russians, not by Chinese. Chinese influence has only come in much more recently. But that gives you an idea. So there's often in the graphic, in the design, there's a historical context. And Koreans are Korean. There's nothing more important than being Korean. My North Korean, once took my North Korean friend, and I said, do you want to watch a football match? China it's South Korea and China. And I said, we can sit in the Chinese side, because he obviously couldn't go and sit with the South Koreans. And I've never seen a man more angry. He said, I am Korean. And I think that's a very important thing to realize. If you're working with Koreans, Korea is best, simply. The slight aesthetic also comes in that goes against the grain of this sort of socialist greys and browns, is their colour. And this I'll sort of pick up later, but I think in a funny way it's influenced there. This is sort of perhaps a bit not totally sort of academic way, but I feel that their designs, their use of colour, if there was something that's very specific to North Korean design, it is that sort of reflection, if you like, of bright colours and strange colour combinations. They're not afraid of your primary colours. Now we start getting into the sort of more interesting thing. Here's a packet of cigarettes, and this is where everything starts coming together. You see the pine tree, that's the traditional tree of long life, nothing like smoking and having a healthy long life. But in the background, you've got an imprint there of Mount Paektu. And Mount Paektu is the birthplace of the revolution. It's where supposedly Kim Il-sung, and he was there up in that region, fighting the Japanese occupancy of the country, the suzerainty from 1905, 1910 to 1945. But it's also the birthplace of the Korean people. And I think if you look at Paektu, they were occupied by Japan. Japan had Mount Fuji. So it's this sort of the heart they put into Paektu, the whole of the Korean nation. It's a very significant emblem, and you find these motifs repeated. To a Korean, it's immediate. It says power, strength, quality. And then finally, the sort of lovely one with this one is a cigarette that came out in sort of the late 90s, and it's an imitation of Rothmans. Rothmans cigarettes were getting into the country from people coming in from Beijing and by the train at that time, which was running twice a week from Dandong. And this is their imitation. It's that sort of quality. It's one of the first imitations of a Western brand. As they said, that the smoking is a different experience altogether. But there we go. The matches that you would use, this is the Kangchol Steelworks. And again, as soon as the Korean sees this steelworks, this is the Cholima Steelworks, that immediately imbues that element with strength, with resilience, and there you have, the sun rising up over the steelworks. It's also the subject of a very famous painting, but that gives you an idea of where the graphic influence comes from. Graphics is taught. North Korea has an incredibly literate society, as you would imagine for most communist countries, whether it be Mongolia or what have you. But it's literate, but it's backwards in learning. This is the art studio. This is the industrial art studio, where the majority of graphics that are in the book on sale now to discount price, sorry, where the majority of graphics are made. They're all students who've been taught by Manstay Art Studio. This is the biggest, one of the biggest art studios. They've all been taught by the Fine Art Studio, and then the artists then either go to one of the 4 big art studios or to the Industrial Design Studio. And this is the sort of work that they were producing by hand. Everything in North Korea is systemized. If you're bringing out a new product, the product will have to be approved, and then the product will then be sent to this graphics unit where they will illustrate it or provide the promotion for it. This is up in Paekdo again. You see Mount Paekdo, the victory statue in the front. This is taken about 2002, 50 years celebration of the end of the Korean War. This is how I think a lot of us still perceive graphics in North Korea, sort of hand-drawn, hand-painted on a billboard. But nowadays, they've sort of upped the tech. This is a digital, what we would use here, you'd have sort of family household products being sold on a light board that glows at night, and in North Korea they have the propaganda. It is what they've done is they've taken pieces and they've sort of readapted them. Sadly now the traffic girls have almost been replaced by traffic lights as well, so everything can be slightly dated in North Korea. This is a shot of 95, and it gives you a sort of feeling of North Korea at that time. It was very drab. They were still in the colours, the greys, the browns. Everything stayed very sort of still almost. If you have a map of Pyongyang now, it's still basically the same map that you would use, apart from 3 new streets. Nothing has changed very much. The biggest change was in 2002, economic change, which brought in a sort of a form of market reform. Certainly not market reform, but in Pyongyang, it allowed foreign goods to start coming in, and goods from China came in. And this is a bunch of kids in 2006, and sort of Pyongyang, 2.5 million people, relatively privileged people, certainly compared to living outside Pyongyang. But they're normal kids. There's nothing, they're not propaganda kids. But this was the fashion at the time. I remember going to a girl and said, "Do you have jeans?" And she very carefully, the guide said, "They're not fashionable anymore." Jeans have never been allowed in North Korea. But this is as extreme as you could get. So this is a bunch of schoolgirls sort of pushing the limits. And there are people around the streets who are young students who actually they're sort of clothes police. They are there to inspect you, to make sure your hair is the right length, to make sure you're not going slightly out of the system like these girls would have been. So unfortunately, this has sort of been tightened up now. You don't get this outlandish 2006 look. But you do get, this is what I love about this is a sun hat, but it's at night. There's some awareness. People are aware that this is influence from outside, and it's a very film look. I like sort of, this is one change that I've really noticed. The other one, of course, with China links, this is a shop here at the metro, and just full of Chinese rubbish, very plasticky things, but things that glow, things that are shiny, and this is what people want, affordable tack, if you like. One of the biggest changes was, in fact, one of the few things that I've worked sort of on since 2002 is the Pyongyang International Film Festival. This is an audience, this is my favourite shot I've ever taken, I think. It's of a group of people watching Mr. Bean. Not one of the most high-level films, but it's the girl who's laughing, the girl who looks like she's asphyxiating herself, is actually sort of laughing into it's very rude, obviously, to sort of burst out laughing, so she's put a cloth in front of her. But the power of this film was absolutely enormous. We then managed to show, actually before this, we showed Bend It Like Beckham. Not as funny, but also brought out, it sort of exposed people to something new. There's a wonderful part in it where, I don't know if you know the film, but there's a wonderful part where the coach says to the girl, if you want to become a football player and your parents don't agree with you, you've got to go your own way. And the whole audience went, oh. And I thought, but what they translated it as Jucha. You will follow the Jucha way. So North Koreans will also, where they can, take the advantage of using the West as propaganda. We managed with the British Embassy to get that film broadcast throughout the country in 2010. This is the end of, if you like, the end of an era of handmade graphics. It's a North Korean Coca-Cola or cola. To me, that was the harbinger of change. It wasn't just this economic. You do get Coca-Cola in North Korea, but it's in short supply, and so they came up with we'll do the same, but we'll do it better. I don't know, it's the Coke, it's the real thing. I'm not quite sure if that really is the real thing. It's different anyhow. So North Korea, this is an early sort of 50s poster. This is sunflower. It's actually about how much sunflower you can grow on land, but you can see the products that are coming out. These are detergents, household goods, makeup, etc. Sort of rather bland packaging. And these are posters from the 70s where they're trying to influence you to, buy Korean. Korean is best. And at that time, the only exchange partners, they weren't part of Comecon. They were linked to it, but they were part of the non-aligned group. And so you got films, for example, dubbed in French to go off to Africa or Vietnam. And you got a few products that would be exported to some unlucky sod in Romania. There is choice in North Korea. This is cider and a sort of pop drink. Funnily enough, though, there is more than just the one supply. I mean, with beers and cigarettes, there is choice. And again, looking at graphics, it allows you to sort of take something further. The cigarette packet at the top, the Hana, this came out around 2000. It was the Hana is one, Korea is one. And this is the light blue is the flag that would represent a joint Korea. And North Korea always put Korea as one. It's very, very rare for them to acknowledge the border on the country. So if they're painting Korea, it's all painted in a great big red colour normally. That went out of fashion as basically the whole around 2005, 2006, as did the talks, as did the reunification fall to pieces. So that cigarette's no longer there. Kangsol, is a worker's cigarette. They like that. That's a classic smoke. And for your Pyongyang person, quite clearly, the one with all the motifs, the Cholima horse, the Grand People's Study House, everything to a North Korean that symbolises Pyongyang, the most beautiful city in the world. This is not in the book. This is the change, really. This is what's happened, is with products coming in from abroad, not only have new products come in that are affordable, particularly from China, it's given the North Koreans a sort of kick to make their own products and repackage them. And these are actually relatively tasty products. They're like White Rabbit you get in China and sort of Choco Pie you get in the South Korea. This is a significant change, and this is what engagement has allowed. It's a burgeoning middle class has established itself in Pyongyang. They hold the money, and they can buy these products. They sort of filter out as soon as you leave Pyongyang. But Pyongyang is Kim Jong-un's heartland. If he loses that, he's lost everything. So he is supplying people with dolphinariums, with ice rinks, and with the goods and the sort of chattels that surround a burgeoning middle class. And it's fascinating to see that this sort of bourgeoisie element has come in, and it goes right through to whether it's apartment design. People, for example, in their apartments, you'd never see in a magazine of North Korea what inside of an apartment looked, because it was too bourgeoisie, too risky, people having different strata. But nowadays they say this is how you can decorate your home. So things were happening, and unfortunately, I'll come probably back to that in the questioning, but with sanctions, the money stops, people are now stopping buying luxury products. How are we doing for... We're good, I'm probably about. This is Pyongyang. This is one of the big sort of new Chinese sort of joint venture store, but this is all North Korean goods, and you can see this sort of color reference again. There's a lot of additives in that, but it's this is where people go to shop. This is the new Korea, if you like. And it sort of reflects itself in a way. This is Pyongyang sort of then and now, where they can't sort of demolish houses at a speed. What they've done is they've painted them. They've sort of given it a facade look. So this has sort of enlivened the city. and they're a new. This is Yongmyong Street, the very new street, finished this year, and it is like that's my photograph. I was there a few weeks ago, and with that comes this whole middle class that I was talking to you about. And yes, it is a small proportion of the country. I mean, 10% who live in this city. You go elsewhere, it is not like this. You go to Kaesong, etc. You're right, or onto the East Coast. You're right back to sort of the same standard it was when I first visiting. But they've moved Pyongyang up, and these are snaps. These aren't sort of propaganda pieces. There's not like they suddenly lay on a load of kids with a kid with his new sort of toy, inflatable toy, and the kid on a bike actually carrying a myeontae, a sort of a dried fish, which I love. I thought that was very. It sort of added that sort of, to me, is very that personal thing that this is actually a kid going out with his grandfather and his fish, his dried fish. So. Life sort of moves on. I'm at the end now, but I think the warning is not all that is colourful means that things are changing. This is the colour set of books produced by Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il and Sons Incorporated. These are pamphlets on basic guidance for socialism, etc. So everything that is colourful doesn't necessarily mean change. It is still the most draconian society on this planet. But, and I think this is the sort of the but, I was been in North Korea for 25 years, and I don't like this sort of black and white view of it. And I understand that for you as journalists, you can only see what you are shown. I mean, and if you can nip out a little bit, you still don't get a touch of reality. I've been lucky. I was invited to North Korea initially, and through making films and dealing with non-government people, but dealing with filmmakers or people in the travel business, I've been lucky enough to sort of perhaps get around a few areas. And there's this sort of, the personality that is North Korea to me is very important, and no more so at this time with this sort of geopolitics going on. I think sort of fine to lambast Korea, but to paint it as the axis of evil, and to bring back put it back on the terrorism list, to continue the sanctions, isn't very productive. And I ended with this. It's one of my favourite objects. It's salt. It's from Air Koryo. It's this idea that you can have frivolousness in North Korea, that there is a personality there, that somewhere along the line someone has said, okay, for the state airline, we have to provide salt. And rather than just stamping salt on it, it has to go through the bureaucracy. Fine, I understand that. Has to be approved. But also there's a sort of a touch of an individual there. And I think that is what is missing. And I think I will probably end it on that. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Nick, thank you for the excellent presentation. Very enjoyable. We'll move to questions, and perhaps I'll open up, if you don't mind. You mentioned the growing middle class in Pyongyang. You mentioned the sanctions. Do you have any sense how those sanctions are hurting over recent months in terms of economically on the people living there? Is it blocking the flow of goods in terms of the Chinese tat, for example? How is it impacting on the ground?
Yeah, China and North Korea, sorry to sound, to some people, it's very difficult in the levels, because some of you know a lot about it, some not so much. But Mao Zedong sort of had China and North Korea relationship as lips and teeth, and that is now it's lips and maybe false teeth. There's a connection, but it's very tenuous. I think for Xing, I think that the thing is that North Korea wasn't playing this younger brother role, wasn't paying respect to North Korea, and for Kim Jongun, he was very worried of China. I mean, they say that the North Korean friend said to me that America is a 100-year-old enemy. China, sort of give it a so 800 or so, but China is our real enemy. We want rapprochement with North Korea. This was told to me 2 weeks ago by a fairly high-up chap. They are worried about China, and China also is supplying everything. So, for example, petrol has now gone up 3 times more. Instead of $70, I think it's about it's not quite 3 times, but $180 now. It's expensive, and the people who have the money are this burgeoning middle class. They've got 70% estimates sort of the money, and the government want that money. And people now aren't spending; they are now buying food. So my friends, I've showed you some shops, with all this Chinese tack. I've got quite a few friends who do that from China. They supply all this sort of tack, if you like. That stopped. They've all stopped work. That's three people I know who do that as a job. That's stopped. There's no demand for it. People now want food products. It's very, very difficult to get anything delivered to North Korea at the moment, whether it be humanitarian aid, which we're just involved with, because China won't touch anything. The Chinese won't touch anything associated with North Korea. Even if it's allowed to go in, it's better just not to touch something. The bigger the tree, the more wind you pick up. Just leave it until things settle. So yeah, in Pyongyang it's hurting. Up in the countryside, it's getting, again, very, very serious. I've got friends who run a magnesite mine up in the northeast, and they're tough again. It's very tough again. People used to, and everyone has also come in now from the Middle East. They've brought back, the last month has seen plane loads of Korean workers coming, building the World Cup stadiums, etc. They're all back now. And this friend of mine, he used to run a mine. It was called the Lebanon Mine. I mean, he still runs it. Sorry. And at one time, I think in the 80s, these North Koreans they do actually earn money. It's not much, but they get to take back a proportion of that money. And his mine was known as the Lebanese mine because everyone was doing quite well out of it with sales with China. That's stopped totally. And now they've had to close. They had a soup kitchen for all a sort of big kitchen where everyone came in for a meal. That's all closed. So they're tightening the belts. And if you do that to a North Korean, he'll understand the significance of this. I dread that to think it's already very desperate that it goes back to the stage of the 90s. But I think, as Putin said, they will eat grass. This is why sanctions won't work in North Korea. We've clearly seen that demonstrated in the 90s. I was there. It's not a very pleasant experience. I think engagement was, you balance it that way. But engagement was empowering a middle class. I think it's a bit of a dangerous situation at the moment.
Okay, so questions on the. Okay, we'll start on the left then, please. If you could just say your name and.
Thank you. Name is David Roach. I want to ask about the middle class. The people who have 70% of the money and live in Pyongyang. What do they do? Are they in fact people employed they have to be by the regime itself? And therefore, in fact, Kim Jongun has a captive city with a captive audience with a captive employment register. Is that how it actually works? Is that the essence of the middle class?
Yeah, it's a good question. And a difficult one to answer. I can give you because I'm not an economist on it, I'll give you my personal sort of feelings on it. There was a lovely time just after the Arduous March where the men were, as you say, having to work for these government systems, so no way of getting extra funding from them, even though this economic change had come in. And it was the women who were free, and the women were going around on the markets. So they'd go out to the countryside, bring stuff in, sell furniture, set up shops, some of our friends made bags, plastic bags. They got loans. There was an Australian company setting up loan things for microfinance. So there's all sorts of small products. And there was a lovely saying from the women, which was, having a husband is like turning the light on in the day, i.e. bloody useless. And that's North Koreans speaking, so that's direct from them. The money that was coming in to feed this middle class was coming in from mainly the coal exchanges with China, and it just filtering through that trade, because that then allowed trade to happen, and then people could get involved in it. And you find, like the people who work with me, the guides, the Korean guides, you'll find that when times are tough, they'll come and do tourism work. When times are looking good, they'll go out and try trade. And there was a lot of, now China's tightened up the amount of North Koreans staying in China. It's still possible to live there, but there are less, and there is less trade, and in fact there's less everything. So it's now very, very tight. Hence, I can see the result of that. But the money was directly from mainly the mining and various others. I think someone likened North Korea once, I think the best way to call it is red Confucianism. It's not Marxist-Leninism, what the whole lot. It's basically, it's a Confucian society. And so therefore, how the money filters is very important, that people are looked after left and right and behind. That's extremely important. Every Korean knows that. But they, I've slightly lost myself on that one. I think, yeah, it's that the whole trade was basically a trickle down. That's it, like a windbreak, and that was the like thing. It was someone wrote it once, and it shouldn't work, but it does. It's a broken fence, and there are armaments in that. There's tourism to a small degree. There's drugs. There's mining. They're all sort of branches of the economy. None of them really on their own are doing extremely well, but together it performs its task. So I can't answer it, and I think anyone who does answer that is lying, because I've seen how Koreans get money, and it's in all sorts of ways. But the main thing was certainly through the mining, and that created the impetus for trade to sort of work around it. So I'm afraid, as a non-economist, that's my best pitch for that. Thank you.
Okay, we'll work from the left over. Yes, please.
Nick, thank you. It was fascinating. Oh, sorry, I'm Michelle Garneau. Who are they blaming in North Korea for this change? Who are the North Koreans blaming for it?
This, I'll just give you another anecdote, not from me, from my North Korean friend. And when sanctions were first applied under Trump, he said, what's he doing? Because all you're doing, the first time we're looking outward. We are, as Koreans, we're seeing trade, we're seeing places we can go to, we're thinking outside the box. And what's happening is, what you're doing by putting sanctions on us is you're gluing us around the core again, because we're Korean. That goes back to the very first thing I said. We're Korean. We will, if we're going to go and commit suicide, we're going to go down together. That's very, very clear. Then what happened is, this is earlier on this year, Kim Jongun started keeping processing of this nuclear thing going, and people said, hang on, this isn't defensive. And then my friend said, yeah, it's good. People are falling away from it. They understood the need for defense, but now it's looking like offensive. They don't, and it's sort of almost, people were being peeled away. And now that, unfortunately, with sanctions again, it's gone back to that core. People are people in Pyongyang are aware of just how nasty Kim Jong-un is, but they're also quite aware that he's playing a incredible set of cards, if you like. So if he can come out of it all right, then he will still have a strong power base. He's not going to get toppled. You saw very clearly, the triangle is him, his wife, and his sister. And the uncle was the sort of middle section. That's all gone now. And my chum was meant to be in that middle section, i.e. taken away, and that's the end of him. But he unfortunately was outside in China, so he's still around. But that's the gap, and that's how they can remain in control. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Yes, in the middle, please.
Steve.
Hi, Steve Hines. You just mentioned that people know that Kim Jong-un is a nasty piece of work. I mean, is there any sign whatsoever within the country of dissidents, organised opposition, anything like that?
I was speaking to a Chinese friend, one of the Star Group, one of the artists, sort of, and I knew I was from China in '93, and we used to hang around with them at Yuan, this sort of art colony. And I said to them, as kids, they're the same age as me. When you were sort of in your 90s and 20s, were you thinking of painting? I was saying this earlier, like Mao, naked and sort of in red pants, and absolutely not. They were totally closed off. And I think I've never seen. There was a report about 5 years ago that the portrait had come off one of the buildings of Kim Il-sung's portrait was there, and then Kim Jong-il's report, it was gone, and there was a massive hysteria in the sort of Western media. He's being deposed, being moved, and the painting was being cleaned, and then at the same time there was graffiti on the tube, and there was graffiti, except the trains were actually West German trains, and it was graffiti so we got it all wrong. I don't think they've taken their eyes off. There was a reason that last year there was a pretty muted report that you will not be sarcastic, because this is how people do deliver things to people. The weather's looking a bit shit today. Yep, it'll go on for some time. That's a Korean thing, way of explaining the situation, and that would be to a close friend. and a very close friend. So people know, they're absolutely petrified. I've never seen any of it. You hear from defectors that there's, nothing on that scale. You either you don't know, and you basically you're hemmed in by your own. There's a lovely story of Mo Yen, who the Chinese Nobel guy, and he was influenced by, in the Cultural Revolution, it took a North Korean film, it took Flower Girl, for him to actually see that film, to realise the desperate state that his country was in. It needed something to open their eyes. And again, going back to this North Korean friend of mine, Koreans need their eyes opening. They need to be woken up. So I don't think so. I think we want to believe there is in that, but I know the art industry very well, and the film industry, and there's not a hint. Not like in Russian films in the 60s. Nothing there. Absolutely nothing.
Stay in the middle here, please. Thank you.
Tony Watson, Hong Kong Society of Financial Analysts. What do you take away from the state of the North Korean soldier who got shot up coming across the border? The fact that he was full of worms, underweight, and reportedly asking for Western pop culture when he came out of his coma.
Yeah, it's in a funny way, I'm amazed at how few people leave the country, whether that's simply because it is so difficult to leave, and whether they're leaving out of political repression or whether it's just or being exposed to something else. The story at the DMZ on that day, we were there, I wasn't there, my colleague was there, was that he'd knocked over, this is how the North Koreans can repackage that very simply. He was a drunk driver, killed someone in Kaesong, and just took his car and drove it right through. And he clearly didn't, when he gets to the DMZ, he didn't know where to go. He had a rough idea. But when you head south, but the DMZ's angled west-east, so that's where he got into trouble. So I don't know what his background is. Every man, not woman, but every man has to join the military at some point. Maybe he understood there was something else out there, or maybe he did just, he's a fugitive rather than a defector. The worms and things, that doesn't surprise me. This is agriculture. It is not good. Even if you produce excess food in the countryside, and I know this because we do stuff in orphanages, they've got food in the larder, but it's non-perishable because they simply don't have any storage. So and you're also living on a very, very basic diet. So absolutely night soil. That's worms from night soil. It's not unheard of. I think it's not it happens in China, happens in a lot of areas. I'm not worried about that. And the story of why Iran, I don't know. But the thing that actually surprises me is that a lot of people just take it. And again, going back to the 90s, you see what happens when people take it. They simply fall over and die. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. A lot of these, he could have been, if he's a soldier, he could have come from Pyongyang or one of the other cities. There are balloon and things that get sent over from the south, and it may have an impact. If you're getting a memory drive, you have to have a computer to check it, and you have to be bloody careful. I know someone who had a South Korean CD. True story. She had a CD that she bought from a chap around Pyongyang, a seller, and watched it. She was a sort of 19-year-old girl, got caught. People who sold it to her reported to her, and the people, because they wanted the house, so she basically said to the parents, "You will sell us this house, you will move," and she committed suicide. And the reason it got out into public knowledge was that the parents then went and said, "This is what's happened," to the police. So I don't know how people get their information, but it seeps through in strange ways.
Questions? Yep, just down here at the end.
Roger Barrett, Crest Energy and Korea Business Consultants. Nick, thanks very much for your excellent insight. I too have been going there about 25 years, doing business there mainly, and I'm pleased to hear Nick say, I think, that you would advocate engagement rather than isolation or sanctions. And I just remind all the press, respective members of the press here, about the Perry report, which in 1999 was commissioned to say, what should we do about North Korea? And the number one thing it said was engagement. So my question is, do you really believe that is what should happen? Because they are a very proud people, as you know, and I think engagement works, but it's not working because it's not allowed to work under the sanctions regime that's really enforced by the United Nations Security Council at the moment.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, it's interesting that North Korea is the most isolated country in the world, and the policy that we have is of isolating it further. And certainly, for engagement, I think it would be very difficult to have any less engagement. I mean, there's the Goethe Institute was doing bits and pieces. The humanitarian aid is doing bits and pieces. And I would love to say it's a fix, but of course it's not. It's a very thin. It's part of a political action. I mean, it's a very nasty country. I don't believe the country is going to change to engagement, but I think it's part of that process that's been lacking. And having seen China change, been living there since '93, and seeing my friends my Chinese friends influenced by engagement, friends here who've met authors and who've been influenced simply by that side, by the world outside. And that gentleman's question, I think, there's nothing to change the psyche of a North Korean if ever they were given the position to vote. The thing is, and the sad thing is, that will never happen either. So it's a bit of both. But the impasse we have at the moment is interesting. I think engagement is one of those layers. It's a lower one, but I wish it had continued in some way, because I'm a great believer in serendipity. The kids I knew at 20 are now 40 and now are part of the government. They're well-educated, as you imagine, privileged people who I've worked with. They are now well-educated, privileged people in position. And if ever came to a position where they could make a decision, they have a better understanding than their fathers did, and could have been better. So yes and no, I think, would be my answer to that. Thank you.
So we're getting close to time now. We've time for one or two more here in the middle, please.
Thank you. Hey, Nick, thanks so much for the fascinating talk. I just want to ask you that with all the media coverage that you watch, read, and with people that come back to you with questions from what they have watched and read of the media's coverage of North Korea, what do you think might be missing, and what do you think we might have covered wrong when it comes to North Korea? And what do you think, if you were in the position of deciding what to focus on, what do you think would help the outside world to understand what is happening within North Korea, keeping in mind the very, very limited access that we actually have?
I think it's interesting, the American chapter for CNN, just with the vox pops on, when he goes down to the subway, and then there's the guide is in the background, the same guy saying, "You will say this to him, speak to him." You'll always get that with North Korea. You get anyone presented to you as a journalist will often be a stooge, or I mean, in fact, even in North Korea, they're taught beforehand. If they're ever taught, how much does the statue weigh? Everyone is told at school, if a foreigner ever asks you, then I was speaking to a defector the other day in South Korea, and he said, you're told this at school, that it is as heavy as my heart, for the love of my country. So they're all, no matter any North Korean, you're not going to get someone who's going to go, God, it's hell here, I'd really like to get out. So I think you're already on a loser. I think that it's interesting, it's time. I mean, Raf Rober does, for APTN, does incredible footage and coverage because he's filming the banal, and it's more those standoff shots. The shots of Pyongyang street scenes are real street scenes. They're not fake. And how I understand North Korea is by observing people, and that's the most important thing. You see them laugh, you see there is. Nowadays, for example, one of the biggest changes, very simple, is fathers will, couples will hold hands. That's never used to happen. Fathers won't necessarily go shopping, but they will push the wheelchair with the kid. There are little vignettes that are happening that sort of show that humanity. You go to the circus, kids laugh, they there's the basic simplicity is there, which I think is very difficult to get on film, and all you will get when you go for an interview is that standard, thanks to the leader, this wonderful la-di-da-di-da. We filmed The State of Mind. It took a year of filming, and the girls were eventually saying enough. They'd really reached the end. So we were getting on film some wonderful little vignettes. There's one where the girl lost her badge, and her friend goes, and it's all you need, just the sort of, ooh, you're in trouble. It's not she won't be sent away, but it was a serious thing to happen. And unfortunately, I don't think in a week you will get that access. You will just, you just report what they show you, and you get that sort of very, very BBC point of view, which is this is nuts, and it is nuts. But underneath that, there's the humanity. I don't think there are any tricks apart from it's having a really amazing cameraman being able to pick up those sort of nuanced shots. Sorry, thanks.
Okay, so unless there are any final questions, okay, just one last one then, please.
Some time back, you did a film called Crossing the Line.
Yeah.
About US Army defectors. I believe there was one man still living in North Korea. Do you have any update about him?
Joe Jesnok. And unfortunately, he died 2 years ago. It was reported in the Western press a year ago, but he actually died 2 years ago. This is the American who crossed in the 60s, the four of them. But more, perhaps, interest of the boys. I can actually... This is never ever do this, go into your but the, this could bring up anything here. Let me just see if just one sec. Yeah, so the Dresnok boys, they're still around. DRES. And here we are. Can you view enter full screen? These are the Dresnok kids. These are Joe's children. I'm in the middle, that's not them. And they're disguised as foreigners, although they are sort of foreigners, because they're actually playing two parts of foreigners in a foreign film. So these are two of the two sets of families here, and these are the boys. And they've actually, what's fascinating is they've married their Korean sweethearts they had from school, and they've now got kids of mixed race. So they speak basic English. I still keep in touch with them. So yeah, it's another story to tell at another time. And they do occasional filming and trade and what have you. But they are Korean basically. They don't go outside. So there's a few more mysteries waiting to be told, I think.
Okay, so we're out of time. Nick's book is available to be bought at the front of the dining room. Could you all please join me in thanking Nick for a fantastic book?